Hi, good afternoon. My name is Steve Sukenik, and I am the Steward Experience Events Coordinator. And it's nice to see a lot of new faces, and certainly happy to see some of the regulars. We probably, like I said, have probably 40 screens, which is great. Today's Lunch and Learn is about Citizen Science Program's Tortoise Telemetry project. First off, I wanted to say I'm so sad that we're losing two of our extraordinary leaders. Phyllis Burks and Rory Cassidy are moving back to their children, I think, more likely than justified, but they'll be so sorely missed. Their passion for education and engagement was extremely contagious, and they certainly will be missed. As I said a few minutes ago, and Art was talking to some of the new Steward 101 candidates or stewards. Glad to see the new faces, and also, so that training is in progress. We've started the training for the Patrol Pathfinder orientation, filled up these first couple of sessions. I'm anxious to see how it goes on Saturday for the next Patrol Pathfinder orientation. And hopefully we continue to need more room than what we thought we would. Keep your eyes open for the information on the McDowell Sonoran Conservancy's 30th anniversary. And the program's coming up next month in October. Our legacy steward, Bernie Finkel, will do a program on nature's medicine cabinet. And the second part of the month, I'm so honored to be able to say our City of Scottsdale Northern Region Natural Resource Coordinator, John Lolette, will be giving us some of the inside scoop on the new Camino Campana Interpretive Trail at Fraysfield. Say that 10 times real fast. But I also wanted to know what Camino was, because I wasn't, but it means path, I believe, in Spanish. So now we all are up to speed on why it's Camino. So in the spring of 2021, the Conservancy initiated a project to study movements and habitat use of the tortoises. The goal is to understand how the tortoises are using the preserve and how human activities might influence this sensitive species. The Tortoise Telemetry project is just one of many projects that our citizen science group studies to better understand our preserve ecosystems. We'll hear from John Zacchaeus, who will give us a brief description of why you don't have to be a scientist to enjoy and learn citizen science, and our two major speakers. So I have to tell you, I am always marveled at the level of expertise that we have in our community, our staff and our stewards. But here's a little bit of a background on the two of our extraordinary presenters today. So Rob Halligan is a steward and one of the leads of the Tortoise Telemetry project. First of all, Rob, I want to really thank you for your service. And when I asked you for your bio, you made what I thought was a pretty profound statement about the McDowell Sonoran Conservancy, which I think is really worthy of repeating. So you said, I hope you don't mind me quoting you, the broad educational and field study opportunities offered in the life sciences has been all new and exciting to me. So I've gone both feet into the program, and I have to tell you, we're certainly glad you have. So Rob spent the last 4 decades here in Arizona. And after a career in the US Army, Rob went to work for Scottsdale-based General Dynamics Mission Systems. He has a BS in physics, MS in radio radar system engineering, with postgraduate studies in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. It sounds like he's the guy to keep track of our tortoises. Tiffany, first of all, happy birthday, Tiffany. Where are you? Okay. Oh, so you're over there with John and the kids. Okay, happy birthday. I think it's tomorrow. Tiffany has been with the Conservancy now since 2017. And as the Parsons Field Institute manager, has a BS in wildlife science from University of Arizona. She says, go Wildcats. Okay. And MS in applied biological sciences from Arizona State University. Go Sun Devils. That's where my son graduated from. As a wildlife biologist, she has worked with a variety of wildlife and habitat restoration projects and specializes in rare sensitive species, including bats, Sonoran desert tortoises, northern Mexican gardener snakes, black-footed ferrets, and more. Tiffany really has devoted her life to protecting our natural world while educating and inspiring others to do the same. I am so glad and welcome to hear from the three of them. John, I think you're going to start off by telling us a little bit about the program. Welcome.
Yes, I am.
We're just getting our screen shared here,
Okay.
crossing our fingers that does it right.
Ding. Can you see
There
that?
you go.
All righty. Well, thank you, Steve. The biggest wildlife Tiffany has to deal with is crazy stewards, but that's another story. So welcome to Lunch and Learn, our citizen science program. And I'm going to, we're going to talk primarily about the Tortoise Telemetry project. And I'm sure many of you are interested about that. But I wanted to give you an overview of citizen science. And, one thing people sometimes think about the citizen science program is, the question is, do I need to be a scientist to participate in the citizen science program? And no, you really don't. I mean, there's a variety of projects that all stewards and even some of the public can participate in. And we'll talk briefly about some of those. But some of them are, the bird studies, butterfly study. And, these are both very public facing. There's the Cave Creek Christmas bird study, which is the longest running citizen science program in North America. It started actually in 1900. The Tortoise Telemetry project, which we'll talk about later on, again, we need help with tracking down the tortoises, and you can go out with an experienced lead, and they'd appreciate your help. And then also our arthropod study. So all of these you can participate in, and you'll receive training. Some of our long-term monitoring projects are plant phenology, and that you'll need some training on site. But again, you don't have to be a scientist. We put together some of our leads have put together some excellent, Karen Fieldstead has put together some excellent material to help train folks on doing plant phenology to make it very easy to identify the different phenophases of the plants throughout the year. And then also our non-native plant work, we can always use help on between identifying, monitoring, mapping, surveying, and even removing some of the plants. There's also work that you can do behind the scenes if you don't want to go out in the field. We can use help developing communications on the various projects that we work on. Our website management, where we're posting a lot of our photos and information, which also leads to photo cataloging. As we're out in the field, we take quite a few photos, and Juan's done a great job putting together our photos and organizing them so they're easy to find. But as we take more photos, that'll become a big job again. Data entry from some of our projects that we do out in the field, data has to be entered off of the manual sheets. And then also we've been working on degraded lands mapping that can also be done behind the scenes. And that project's that part of the project is wrapping up, but we may have other opportunities in that area in the future. So some people ask, will training be provided? And I've mentioned some of this because some people say, well, I don't know a buckhorn cholla from a teddy bear cholla. So, how am I going to be able to help, with these projects in the field? And yes, any necessary training will be provided. Some of it's in the classroom as we get very specific on non-native plants and identifying bunch grasses, some of the annual non-native plants such as Sahara mustard and London rocket. But then other things are easily done in the field and can be shown to you while you're participating in the program. Very quick field training to help you identify things like different plants and help working on tracking and recording data in the field. So a little bit of both. So how do you get involved? Well, you can sign up for Citizen Science 101 if you haven't attended already and attend our exciting orientation program. You can sign up for upcoming projects and better impact. And then you can participate in some programs, learn about other programs that we have going on, have fun, learn neat stuff, meet great people, and maybe even some real scientists, such as these folks pictured here. They look more like wranglers and bank robbers than they do scientists, but they're all scientists, and they're very helpful with some of our projects, but helping educate stewards along the way. So if you're interested, you can, as I said, sign up, but you can also send me an email at citizen_science@mcdowellsonoran.org if you want more information or have interest in some of our projects. And I'd be glad to fill you in and steer you in the right direction to one of our project leads, and they can provide you more information on how you can get involved in many of the exciting projects we have going in the citizen science program. So next up, Rob and Tiffany are going to talk about our really exciting project that we started this year, which is Tortoise Telemetry project. Ooh, I went too far. You got it.
All right, you got it?
Thanks.
Yes. Hi, I'm Rob Halligan. I'm the steward project lead, and Tiffany and I are going to mutton Jeff this presentation to give you a look at what the project purpose is, what we've done to date, some torturally cool observations, because who doesn't like tortoise pictures? Talk about what's coming up, how you can participate, and then we really hope there's time left at the end of our hour here for any Q&A.
All right, so first up, allow us to introduce you to the Sonoran Desert Tortoise. I think that many of you on this presentation have had the pleasure of seeing one out there in the wild. If you haven't, don't be surprised, because they spend much of their life underground, not out in the open. And when they are in the open, they are very cryptic. I can't tell you how many times I've walked past a tortoise and thought that it was a rock. But I should also tell you that I often find myself staring at rocks, thinking that they are tortoises. So these animals are pretty rare. In fact, they are rare enough that they are protected here in Arizona. They're what's known as a Tier 1A species of greatest conservation need. It's a designation given to them by the Arizona Game and Fish Department. And they're also under consideration for listing under the Endangered Species Act at the federal level. And the reasons for this are really diverse, but some of the biggest threats facing this species are habitat loss and fragmentation, which are big ones for many of the species in this area, as well as across the world. But the tortoise also faces a couple that many other species don't. One of those is disease, which Rob will tell you a little bit about later on. And then the other is that people really like tortoises and they want to have them as pets. But instead of going through legal means, they often go out and remove them from the wild. And this can have pretty profound impacts on a population. So desert tortoises, as you all know, are very long-lived species. They can live 50 to 80 years in the wild, but they also have really slow recruitment. And what I mean by that is it takes a long time for a juvenile tortoise to become an adult. And it takes about 15 to 20 years before they actually become a breeding adult, and so can actually contribute to the population in that sense. But also, very few actually survive to adulthood. The latest projection that I saw said that only about 1 in every 100 eggs will actually survive to become an adult tortoise. So removal of just a couple of these animals from the wild can have pretty big implications for the population overall. So you might be wondering, okay, how are we actually going to be helping with any of that? Well, with this project, what we're really interested in doing is to help fill knowledge gaps. So first of all, the population in the preserve has never been studied before. Areas around the preserve have been studied, but this large area of 30,000 acres has not been studied for the tortoises. So that's one way in which we are helping fill that knowledge gap, because by understanding this population, it's going to give a better perspective of the species overall throughout their entire range. But also the preserve is a really fabulous place so that we can study how our actions as humans are influencing tortoises. So this map that you see here shows the preserve, which we're all familiar with, and it shows the area within the preserve as well as outside. And so each of those little black dots that you see outside of the preserve, and you can't see most of them because they're jammed together, but each of those is a structure that is preserved. And then the areas, those are areas that are either currently being developed or are going to be developed in the near future. The shading means that it's more dense residential development. And so this gives us a great opportunity to see how existing urbanization, as well as upcoming urbanization and development, could be influencing these species or this species. We also have roads that cut through the preserve, and roads are a big deterrent for many species, as well as they can be beneficial for some. And then we have all these trails in the preserve as well. And so by doing this study here in the preserve, we are going to be able to make management recommendations to the city on how to best manage the preserve to benefit not only the tortoise, but the overall ecosystem. And so as John was talking about, this tortoise project is just one of many projects that we do. And all of them are feeding into this big picture of understanding the preserved ecosystem so that we can ensure its health over the long term. So one piece of that that we're really interested in is habitat connectivity. And so those trails and roads and human activities can influence the ability of animals to move across the landscape. So some of you might remember the mule deer study that we did a couple of years ago with the Arizona Game and Fish Department. And from that, we discovered that the roads, as well as recreation on the trails, influences and actually forms a barrier to mule deer as they attempt to move across this preserve area. And not only does that affect the preserve, but it also affects this larger regional connectivity that we are interested in. So many of you have likely seen this map, but it shows these protected areas in the Northeast Valley. And the preserve is really the linchpin that is connecting this area of nearly 3 million acres of protected land. And so by studying and maintaining connectivity within the preserve, we are helping to ensure connectivity across this much broader region. And then the last piece in this that we're really interested in doing is we want to help raise awareness about how amazing this animal is. We want people to understand their role that they play in helping to protect it as well. All right, so how are we doing that? Well, it's quite easy because all we're doing is we're surveying for tortoises. That's helping us get a better understanding of the population within the preserve. But we're also interested in tracking their movements and how they are moving in relation to human activities, roadways, development, and everything else. And then the last piece in here, which is a big one, is the outreach and education. And so I want to thank all of you so much for being part of this outreach effort to learn more about this species. But this picture over here on the left, you might be wondering why in the world did they put this picture in here? This is your chance to see how good you are at doing surveys. How many of you can see the tortoise in this picture? I'll give you a hint. It's dead center in there, but this is actually out at South Mountain. Rob and I went out to do a training out there with Arizona Game and Fish and came across this beautiful male tortoise right out there in the open. So this project is a 3-year project. The field portion of it is only 2 to 2.5 years, but the rest of it was spent planning for it, organizing for it, getting trainings done. And then the tail end of it is going to be processing and analyzing all of our results, as well as writing up all of our amazing reports. So Rob's going to tell you a lot about what we have accomplished this year, because we have done so much. And I am so proud of everybody who has been involved in this. When we talk about how amazing our stewards are, I can't tell you just how amazing everybody is who has been involved in this project. But we have a lot more to accomplish in future years. We will be continuing to do surveys. Our goal is to have at least 20 transmitted animals that we are able to track across the landscape. So we will continue doing surveys as needed to maintain that number. But then we also have telemetry opportunities, and I highly encourage you to come out and join either of these, and Rob will tell you more about them as well. So our stakeholders are very diverse on this. Obviously, the Conservancy and our stewards are a huge part of that. As I said, this information and our recommendations will be going to the city of Scottsdale so that they can best manage for the species and health of the preserve overall. We are also sharing all of our information with the Arizona Game and Fish Department, who is ecstatic that we're able to be out here, and especially that we have such dedicated stewards to participate in this. But then we are also encouraging citizens of Scottsdale, as well as general public, to come out and engage with us, whether it's in the field or if it's just engaging in outreach efforts like this. We would love to have as many people involved in this as we can. So I do want to note that we do have authorization to do this project. I'm sure many of you know that you are not supposed to handle wild tortoises, and indeed you are not. But we have gone through extensive training so that everybody who is a field lead on this project, we have 12 of them, including Rob and me. We've gone through extensive training so that we know how to safely handle tortoises and interact with them, as well as all the other aspects of the project. We also have permits through the city and the state, and the people who are the field leads are specifically named on those. And then the project is funded through the Arizona Game and Fish Department's Heritage Fund. So our primary study area, because we're really interested in the influence of urbanization, development, trails, roads, everything else, we'd love to study the whole preserve, but that's not feasible. So we decided to focus in on kind of the central area. So just south of the gooseneck, definitely into the gooseneck, and the northern part. And we also can't study everything in here because it's just too much land to cover. So we decided that these would be our primary focal points. Now, if you do observe a tortoise anywhere in this area or anywhere in the preserve, please let us know because we like having that information, but it's possible that that tortoise could become one of our study animals as well. But if you look at these circles that we've drawn on here, you're going to see that they give us a really good mix of different environments out there. So we have areas that are close to roadways, we have areas that are close to existing urbanization, close to areas that are currently being developed, as well as interior to the preserve and farther away from any kind of developed areas. And then we have this kind of mix of trail usage and trail density within that as well.
So thanks, Tiffany. That's really the science and the policy behind this study, which you need to understand. So what are stewards doing? We're doing three things, the surveys, the processing, and the telemetry, and I'll have a couple of slides on each one of those things. So when we say we're surveying for tortoises, that's, we're out on a search, okay? We've identified probable good terrain that then I guess the best thing to say is we swarm to cover as much of this terrain as we can and find those first tortoises. They're in ground burrows. You see that center photo there underneath the boulder, tucked away in the boulder piles that you might see up on Granite Mountain, for example, or down in the washes. And Tiffany has a picture of the tortoise from South Mountain. As soon as I say there's a rule, then it turns out there's not a rule. We're typically finding them in rocky, complex terrain. Photo on the right is in the Tom's Thumb area. And then we'll turn right around and there'll be one in the open on the flats. So predominantly rocky, complex terrain. However, it was a lot of fun this year when the monsoon came and it triggered just an explosion in tortoise movement and increase in the number of sightings of incidental tortoises that we picked up, to include a new one today. So high, low, tough, easy, we have all the terrain. That's an interesting picture. That again, one on the left, we just found out in the open, it was masking, that's the behavior. One on the middle was a little bit tougher to get to. We are debating whether those are Mike Wunsch's feet or Tom Hillman's feet. We can't remember now, that was back in April. But yeah, once you find the tortoise, if he's not convenient, you've got to reach in there and very gently and safely pull that tortoise out for its processing and then return it to the location. And right after we returned to that particular tortoise, I looked one more time underneath the tree and then the Gila monster came out. So we're finding some interesting stuff out here. So that's surveying tortoises, and we've done 16 total surveys here now between April and September. 11 very large surveys with great participation, and then 5 smaller focused surveys. In particular, we're still looking hard at the gooseneck, that connectivity corridor there. We've only got 1 tortoise in that connector, and we don't know what that means. Does it mean there are no more tortoises? Does it mean we're not finding the tortoises? That particular piece of terrain is very interesting to us because of the development happening there just north of the Tom's Thumb and the Story Rock area. And then you've got the boundary on the top from Rio Verde Drive. So you have a tortoise, what do you do? processing the tortoise. And we've used that phrase a couple of times. These are the steps, and I'll just show you those very, very quickly. But in all these photos, when we're handling the tortoises, you're going to see us wearing surgical gloves, vinyl gloves or surgical gloves. And that's not because we're not going to catch any disease from the tortoise. The tortoise isn't going to catch any disease from us. However, tortoises can pass diseases from one to the other. So therefore, it's very important in between handling tortoises that we use the disposable gloves, remove and replace those before we handle the next tortoise. And at the bottom there, all the equipment is disinfected. The calipers, the measuring tapes, anything that touches the tortoise gets disinfected because we're not going to be the vector for disease between these animals. So measuring the carapace and weighing the tortoise. Measuring is done 3 times, and then we take an average. There are standards for what constitutes a juvenile tortoise. That's 140 millimeters. And an adult tortoise would be 210 millimeters or larger. We have them, I think the largest tortoise we've measured so far is getting pretty close to 260, 265 maybe. And that's a tortoise that's going on 50 years old. Here in the photo, that's actually not Stuart. That's Chad Rudke from the Arizona Game and Fish, who has been a wonderful partner to us in this process. Chad provided Tiffany and I our initial training out with his tortoises in South Mountain. We then came back, provided classroom and field training, and Chad has participated with getting our other field leads trained up. And that's how we progressed the program. And Chad and his other compatriots there at Game and Fish have participated in several surveys with us when they get the chance and the opportunity. And man, those guys are tortoise magnets. We think we're good and that we're looking in the right spots. No, somebody who does this for a living, they're really good. I talk about disease. The disease we're concerned about is a respiratory disease. It is found in the Sonoran Desert tortoises. It's bad in the Mojave tortoises to the west. And it's an upper respiratory infection that causes a wheezing and difficulty breathing. And right now, we have not seen any evidence of that in our tortoises here in the reserve. And like I said, we're taking the precautions that it's not going to come from us. Things we're also looking at when we do a health assessment are the responsiveness of the tortoise. Is it alert and responsive to having people handle it? Some of these tortoises that are in the far off parts, we may be the first humans they've ever seen since Nixon was president. So how they react to us is interesting. The fat pads, if you look at the head of this tortoise behind the eyes, it's nice, it's rounded, good healthy looking tortoise. That's a sign that tortoise is well fed and well hydrated. As they start to stress and get dehydrated or lack proper nutrition, the fat pads there and behind the eyes and head there start to cave in, I would say, and you get more of a skull-like appearance. Again, luckily, I have not found that in our tortoises process so far, and which means we're looking at a nice, healthy population. Wounds and parasites, once they're adult size, they're pretty impervious to anything except the mountain lion. Is the only thing that has the jaw strength to break the shell. However, other things like coyotes can nip at them or worry their legs and cause wounds. All parasites are typically ticks. Shell anomalies, they're unique, and it's one way to help identify a tortoise is the shell anomalies, both in the number of scutes. And scutes are those little platelets you see individually there. That's a scoot. And there are scoots along the edge, the margin, and then the scoots right down the center there. There's a standard number. If he's a normal tortoise, they can have an odd number. They can be sometimes oddly shaped. All this is documented in photographs and the recordings, again, so that years from now, literally, this can help identify tortoises that have been studied in the past. We mark and notch and add a license plate. Neither one of these things causes any harm to the tortoise. The shell, the carapace, is made up of the same material as your fingernails. And notching the tortoise is a near permanent way to mark, and they have a unique number. And it's a scheme that the Arizona Game and Fish has. As you go around the marginal scoots there, on the outside of the tortoise, on the right side, that very first scoot corresponds to number 1, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, as you work your way to the back. On the left side, 10, 20, 30, 40. And then the back 4 scoots, you get 100, 200, something like this. Choose the right combination of notches, and you can choose a unique number then for your study tortoise. And we put those notches in there, about 3 to 4 millimeters deep is all. And then the license plate, which you ever come across one of our tortoises, is pretty noticeable. That's just white out, marked with a Sharpie then. This is tortoise, she's marking number 202. As a matter of fact, that notch photo corresponds to the number 2. And then that's covered with some clear epoxy. The license plates will wear off after a couple of years. And the notches, however, will stay there for a long time. Game and Fish gave us a copy of a study where they had gone back to look at tortoises along the San Pedro River that had been done almost 20 years ago. And they were able to track those tortoises because the notches, right, and go back to the reference numbers from the beginning of the century here and track the longevity and the growth and et cetera of these tortoises. So notching is important. They'll long outlive us. And then the other thing you'll notice on one of our tortoises is the VHF transmitter. Again, this does no harm to the tortoise whatsoever. Transmitter in the center photo is in the top right. It's about the size of a quarter. It has a 2-year battery life, and it's emitting a VHF signal at 30 beeps per minute for 2 years. And then it's got a little whip antenna there that comes off to the side. When the study's done, we'll pop those off. They'll be removed. They're just held on with a little epoxy, and once again, no harm to the tortoise, but this is how telemetry works. This is what we're tracking with the telemetry receivers and antennas, and this is how we're recording movement of the tortoises. We don't process them every time. We process them on first capture, and we'll do it again next year on a yearly basis. Don't want to stress the tortoise, and unless you see something obvious like a new wound when we're logging in for telemetry, we leave them alone. Okay, there's no need to stress the animal. And then we let them go. How do I make my video go? Oh. And when we're all done, off they go. Who doesn't like the tortoise?
This gets back to S101, which is fast with the tortoise with a hare.
And we're going to show you some examples. These things are a little more amazing than you might think. So locating the tortoise, we use handheld directional antennas. That's an 8 Adcock antenna there with a receiver. We're listening for those 30 beeps per minute. And it sounds simple in that you have a directional antenna. If you point it towards the tortoise, then the signal is louder than if your antenna is pointed away. So that gives you a direction. And then the strength of the signal increases as you get closer. Okay. In practice, this can become extremely challenging because in the VHF frequency range, terrain interferes with signal. And if you are working through a boulder field and the tortoise is then underneath another boulder, 2 meters in, you will get that signal eventually, but sometimes you got to get pretty darn close for it to work. We've been extremely successful. We have a couple of exceptions, but this is what people are doing 5 days a week across 6 zones are fielding. And these are the trips that you've seen in Better Impact, where it says Tortoise Telemetry, Browns Ranch East. You'll be out there with Juan Fogel and tracking her tortoise. And when we get them, we use survey 1, 2, 3 to do our data entries. We take a GPS on them, we record the environmental data, the weather, etc., and move on to the next. Right now, we have 19 transmitter tortoises against a study goal of 20. That's very good, and that's very successful. We've discovered tortoise clusters. Again, we're not sure if that's because we're looking for them there, or is that their preferred terrain. These are some of the things you have to figure out. But what we really want is gooseneck tortoises, and we would actually trade off a Brown's Ranch tortoise for a gooseneck tortoise if we had one.
All right, so rather than just talking about the process of stuff, we wanted to get into some of the really cool things that we found. And so we are calling those the totally awesome observations, or totally cool observations. And I hope that you will use this opportunity to celebrate with us. No, okay, I love fun, sorry. But one of the things that I think is really amazing about this project is the enthusiasm. We have had so many people who want to be engaged in this work, which is a big part of the project. And we couldn't do this without everyone who has been engaged. So just since we started this project in April, more than 60 people have come out to participate in it, whether through the surveys or through telemetry. Most of those are stewards, and we love having all of you out there. We've also had members of the public come join us. We've had students from a number of different universities come join us. Recently had some high school students express interest in joining us as well. We've had folks from a number of different organizations and agencies come out to help us. And then we also had some consultants come work with us too. And I find that really fascinating because they found our information on the website. They wanted to know more about working with desert tortoises to make them more effective in the work that they do. And so they contacted us and came down from Nevada in order to work with us on this project. So again, thanks so much to everybody who has engaged in this work.
So incidentals. As we look for our marked tortoises, we're finding more tortoises. That's what I meant by we're seeing clusters. And we don't put a transmitter on every single tortoise. It doesn't do us any good really to have 6 transmitter tortoises within 100 yards of each other, right? So maybe we'll have 1 in that group or 2 in that group with transmitters on them and try to separate that to males and females. But the email tortoise@mcdowellsonoran.org, that's me. And I am luckily getting a lot of reports, trail reports from stewards all over the preserve. It doesn't matter if you're in our study area or not. If you get an incidental when you're out there on the trail, email that to me at tortoise@mcdowellsonoran.org. I'll record it. I'll ask you to put it in iNaturalist. At the very least, it's going to go in our database, because we're really trying to understand the total population. We have over 25 incidentals now, in addition to our 19 transmitter tortoises. And Juan Fogel picked up another incidental this morning. So the monsoon was really the trigger. That's when we saw these things just explode. So long distance movements. Again, as soon as I make a rule, there's an exception to the rule. I said a lot of these tortoises, they stay in clusters and they're kind of homebodies within 100 yards of where we found them, and they've spent the summer. And then you get some tortoises that move. 702 is a Granite Mountain tortoise that has moved from the vicinity of the trailhead to above the scenic overlook. Straight line distance well over 2 miles. I don't know how far it is as the tortoise walks, but she's being monitored. And Tort 22, what was the distance on him, Tiffany?
She moved 500 meters in 10 days during the dry season.
500 meters in 10 days. Others stay home. Some of them, they're on walkabout. And yeah,
So speaking of long distance wanderings, the tortoises don't always stay in the preserve. So wildlife definitely don't recognize the boundaries that we put in place. And so it's expected that they're going to be meandering off preserve land. And these two tortoises are kind of special cases in that way. So these are both juvenile tortoises. So they were, when we first captured them in April and May, they were too small to get a transmitter, at least the transmitters that we used. And so they didn't receive a transmitter at that time, processed them, attached license plates, let them go on their way. In August, we received a phone call from Arizona Game and Fish. So a resident had found Tortoise 109 crossing a roadway outside of the preserve in the residential area. And unfortunately, he took it into captivity. He was well-meaning in that, but took it into captivity. But luckily, he contacted the Arizona Game and Fish Department because he saw the license plate on it. Arizona Game and Fish Department was able to track it back to us, got in touch with us. And so then we got an idea and started working with a whole bunch of different people in the department and outside the department and in a bunch of different branches there to see if we could find a transmitter small enough that we could attach to it. And so what you see on Tortoise 109's back and also on 302, that's actually a fish transmitter. Those transmitters are designed to be attached internally, implanted into a fish. But we decided, let's try it out. This is great information to see what these tortoises are doing, put those transmitters on them. And then unfortunately, because they had been taken back into captivity, we didn't want to release them where they had been found there. So we took them back into the preserve and released them there. Tort 302 has a very similar story. It was found on a very busy roadway in a residential area. Person took it into captivity, contacted Game and Fish. We got a transmitter on it and returned it out there. Unfortunately, since then, we did get some data from these guys, but we have lost the signals from them. So we aren't sure if they've moved into areas where we can't hear them, if their transmitters have failed, or if somebody has removed them from that area, either a person, or it's also possible that a predator removed them as well, and thus we're not being able to find those transmitters. We also have an interesting situation here where this tortoise, Tortoise 210, has been giving us some indication about the influence of some of the construction that's occurring out there. So he's made some long distance movements and he crossed through private land, skirting around an active construction area. And then he came to rest over at this point that you see. My husband is actually pointing at the tortoise in this picture. So this is right on the edge of a somewhat busy roadway, and directly across the street is an active construction area. We aren't sure if this tortoise crossed the street and got deterred and came back, or if it got deterred at this point by the roadway or by the construction. He then moved back into the preserve and then decided to head back up into the private land. And on Monday, this is where we found him. He was only 30 meters away from an active construction site with diggers, bulldozers, and other things going on. So our stewards have been monitoring this tortoise daily at this point, so that if he does enter a construction area, we can go in there and we can move him to a safer location. That is one of the goals of this project, is to reduce mortality during construction. But otherwise, we are going to continue to monitor him to see how he is reacting to this construction, and if he is able to find his way around this in order to continue his movements across the landscape.
so towards the trailheads, I said sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's hard. The one on the left there, toward 730, was reported to John Lelete by a passerby, who John then called us, and we went out and got that fellow maybe a meter off of a trail. It was right there. The tort on the right at 702. Tom and Luann Hillman, after spending 4 hours climbing the mountain, chasing their torts, are going back to get to their car. And this guy's sitting there by the map board, I guess, plotting our moves. But Sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's hard. And what that tortoise was doing there, I'm going to play this video, is called mining. Yes, the tortoise is eating dirt and rocks. And what it's doing is it's getting minerals like calcium and phosphorus and iron that aren't available in its plant-based diet. We saw this, we sent the video to Chad, our game and fish wildlife specialist, and he said, not unheard of, seldom observed. You guys are very lucky to have seen that. The other thing we observed out there was courtship behavior. And you can see one of our tortoises all festooned there and an incidental. And beginning of courtship behavior during the monsoon.
So the male, as the tortoise says, bobbing his head, and this is a common behavior, is they'll bob and they'll also rub their head on the female's shell, trying to make her receptive and interested. Strutting his stuff, of course.
Yeah, he's rocking that transmitter, you know, like, hey, baby. And there's some archaeological lawsuits. We're off trail. We're covering ground that's not normally seen. There was a great article in the Summer Mountain Lions on the upland Hohokam who hunted and gathered in the areas where we're looking right now, and things get found. I do have to remind people there's rules. You don't disturb it. You certainly don't remove it. Anything like this that we find is reported to the city. Okay, they're keeping the database of archaeological interest in the preserve, and they have plans for that. Talk to a past finder if you want to know more about that. And there's a couple of good reasons. It's federal law, it's city ordinance, and it's just basic good stewardship to leave things where you find them. We've also found some things we wish we didn't. We found somebody's private barbecue pit party area. Yvonne Mussman removed that for us. We found something, we don't even quite know what it is. We call it the Javelina Garden. Someone out had set up potted plant or clay pots with watermelon, water, and prickly pear cactus plantings. And the nearest we can think is they're trying to make a javelina garden. We're not quite sure about that either, but geotag it, reported to the city, and they take care of that stuff. So survey and telemetry trips are in Better Impact. If you have access to Better Impact, or you can contact me at tortoise@mcdowellsonoran.org. I can tell you what's up and coming. If you go back an hour or 45 minutes, you don't have to be a citizen scientist to do this work. You do need to be an experienced hiker on our jobs. This is, once we're in the area, we're all off trail. There's prickly plants, prickly animals, usually boulder climbing involved. We have not lost anybody. We've not had any accidents, but it's a moderately to very strenuous.
Just listen. What? Oh, okay.
Yep.
So the last thing that we wanted to sneak in here is, what do you do if you encounter a tortoise? So first of all, leave it be. Take pictures of it, but otherwise keep your distance. We don't want to be interfering with what tortoises want to do naturally out there. The only reason why you would ever need to handle a tortoise is if it's in a dangerous situation. And so an example of that is if it's crossing a roadway, especially if it's a busy roadway. And so in that case, you would want to gently pick it up, keep it close to the ground and upright, move it in the direction that it was traveling, and put it in a safe spot off of the road, just so that it's no longer in that dangerous situation. Definitely document the location and let us know. You can send information about any tortoises that you find, again, to Rob at tortoise@mcdowellsonoran.org. And we also encourage you to log your observations of tortoises as well as any other flora and fauna out there. log those in iNaturalist. If you're not familiar with iNaturalist, just do a Google search with it and explore it a little bit. You can download it onto your phone, take a picture, load it up, and that information is there for you as well as for us, as well as for other researchers across the world. I do want to note, please never take a tortoise into captivity, never remove one from the wild, and also never release a captive tortoise into the wild. That is one of the ways that disease and other issues are spread. So with that, any final words, Rob?
No, we're having a great time. It's a wonderful project. Super group of Stewart leads, and many of you on this phone call, I saw the names, have had a chance to go out with us. Those chances continue, though we will continue to do telemetry on a more limited basis through the winter, because the tortoises aren't moving, but we want to know where they overwinter. And then comes springtime, it picks up in full force again. Questions?
Well, there's been several, well, thank you so very much. That was a brilliant program, a very educational. You guys are amazing. I know about the energy that has been expelled by all the stewards. A lot of the questions came in there. The stewards are so excited, they were like answering them for you. But some of them were like, well, they wanted to make sure you knew that was Mike Wunsch's feet, number one. Did you talk about the age of the tortoise? I mean, is there a way to determine the age someone was asking about?
So I don't know if folks tuned in when Natalie Case and Sue and Leona did the talk about herps, about reptiles and amphibians. When the tortoises are young enough, so generally when they're less than 5 or 10 years old, you can actually use the rings on those scoops, on those plates on their shell to determine how old they are. After that, you can't, because they keep rubbing their shells up against things and those shells get worn down, and so you can't see those rings anymore. And they also start to overlap each other. Most of our tortoises, I'm guessing, are at least 30 to 50 years old, but we have had a couple of younger ones as well. Probably in the late teens to 25 years old. And then there's also those juveniles that we discussed.
So someone was saying that you generally track, or you guys were saying you generally track by radio signals. Is there ever any groups that do this type of tracking by GPS signals?
Yes, they do. So there are transmitters out there that have GPS technology in them. They aren't the best designed for tortoises, and they have limited functionality. So what other researchers have done and what we are planning to do is they, in addition to the VHF tracker, which is the only way that we would be able to actually locate those tortoises, they also attach a little GPS tracker. It doesn't send off any signals, but it collects locations and stores it on that device. We then need to go get that device back. What's interesting about those devices is that they are the same gizmos that people put on their spouse's vehicle if they are suspecting that they might be doing things they shouldn't, to track the movements of their spouses. But some researcher back whenever said, hey, I wonder if I could attach this to a tortoise. So that is our plan, is to use those. They would take a location every hour. But unfortunately, due to the worldwide chip shortage, the units that we ordered in April are not available, and we're not sure when they might be available.
I think those trackers, instead of the chip shortage, I think you just have to turn on your Maprika and you could find your friend for sure.
The challenge on the GPS unit is if you're doing a deer or an elk or a bighorn sheep, you can have a big battery and a bigger receiver and a bigger tracker and fly over them with airplanes and such. When you're dealing with a tortoise, like the picture right behind you, Steve, he'll rub that thing off. You know, they'll knock off those transmitters if they're very large, going in and under boulders and just living their lives. So it gets challenging finding the right device for that.
So there was a question about everyone's putting their hands in these rocks and everything, and they were wondering, do tortoises bite?
So first of all, generally not putting our hands under the rocks. We use tools to extract the tortoises instead, because you don't want to go noodling under rocks. As we know, there's Gila monsters and snakes and other things in there. But tortoises can absolutely bite. They cannot bite, but they can bite. And so I have a captive tortoise that we adopted through the Game and Fish Department, and I've been bit by her a couple of times. Generally, they don't bite in defense and stuff. She has only bitten me if I am offering her food.
So is there a way to legally get a tortoise as a pet?
Absolutely, yeah. So unfortunately, because people keep taking tortoises out of the wild and then realize that they live a really long time, also people illegally breed tortoises and then don't want the offspring that they get from that. So people surrender tortoises, and much better to surrender them rather than release them into the wild. So places like Arizona Game and Fish Department, the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum and stuff, they have adoption programs. And if anybody is interested, I recommend checking it out. You do have to safeguard your backyard and stuff, and provide appropriate habitat for them. But you can legally adopt a tortoise. And I have one in my backyard. She's not a pet to me. She's just somebody who lives in my backyard, but it is amazing to have her there.
Easier than your mother-in-law.
Much easier than my mother-in-law.
Yeah, the Arizona Game and Fish website has a link to their tortoise adoption program.
Thanks. So someone was asking about the color white that you paint on the back for the license plate. And they wanted to know, I assume it's because of visibility, but would you rather use something more natural color, or is it really important to see those license plates?
Yeah, so we need the contrast, is that we can look for having to pull the tortoise out, see it. We can see it has that license plate and read off of it. However, with that said, tortoises that are too young put the license plate on because they have hard enough time out there, and very few survive to adulthood. So if they're young enough, we do not put that extra mark on them because we don't want them becoming even more useful out there on the landscape for predators and for other things.
There's again some very excited stewards wanting to know something. Let's see, if we're pathfinding and a visitor can tell us specifically where they saw the tortoise, should we report it? You've already answered that.
Yes.
Yes, please.
Yes, please. They talked about how active or inactive are they in the winter? Mostly in burrows?
So they brumate in the winter, which is similar to hibernation, but for cold-blooded species, ectothermic species. So they can still be active. They don't completely go under, but they reduce their movements. And so that's one of the reasons why we're interested in continuing this over winter, to see if we are seeing movement from them. And then, as Rob said, to see what kinds of habitat, what kind of terrain it is that they're using over winter.
For example, I mean, in December, we may get 3 inches of snow, you may get an 80-degree day in December. So that 80-degree day might be a little interesting to go check on your tortoise.
So you mentioned two terms about, it's not hibernation, it's brumination, but someone said, is that like estivation? I'm not sure if that's such, you know what estivation means?
Truth be told, I get confused between all of those different terms, but yeah, it's very similar. It's reducing movements in order to save energy while resources are more scarce. And in the summer, oftentimes many animals do a similar sort of thing in response to heat or dryness, is they don't move around very much during those times.
Well, you've answered many of the questions that they've submitted. The issues about being solidarity versus groups and clusters. Rob, you mentioned something about the tortoise moving from the trailhead to the scenic overlook, or did I misunderstand you?
I just gave it as an example of a tortoise that traveled a long distance in 1 week, miles.
So what trailhead was that?
I'm not going to say.
We try and keep, Steve, the specific location, the information, specific location of the tortoises just between the leads, because we don't, it's like with any natural wildlife, we don't like to publicize exactly where things are, because in a public forum, people tend to get curious and then try and go out and disturb them.
I overspoke earlier. My point was it moved miles in a matter of 1 week.
Oh, that's important for us to know too, so that if we do spot, then that we're going to keep our information, within the telemetry.
Yes. Yeah, please don't post the location on
It's
Facebook.
because they're so vulnerable to being taken.
Yeah.
That picture of the one in the trailhead, luckily we got there first.
Right.
It was a very hot day. There was only one other car in the parking lot. But what if the wrong car showed up and somebody said, oh, look, a free tortoise? I mean, you hate to think about that.
Especially for the patrollers and the pathfinders to certainly understand that. And as we know, these programs are recorded and will be put on the education page for everybody. Do we have any live questions out there for anybody that we haven't covered? I think they've been pretty extensive. And if we don't, I can tell you, thank you so very much. It's been wonderful, another great learning experience. And again, looking forward to seeing everybody on the trails. Have fun, stay cool.
Thank you, everyone.